It's Tuesday, 12:30, and wherever you are in the world, I hope that your day and your life are going fabulously. And this week on the Mindset Michelle TV show, we have another extra special guest for you. Hello, James.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I'm super excited for our conversation.
So am I, James. James is known as a reconnection specialist, but he didn't quite start off. He didn't come out of the womb going, "Oh, I'm going to be a reconnection specialist." James started off in the health and fitness space and then has had a really incredible journey along with his wife, Nat, and through different businesses since he was 17 years old. So for the past 28 years, and you don't look that old, James, at all, which is really wonderful. It must have been because you started off in the health space. But for the past 28 years, he's grown and sold a number of businesses and is now specializing in this area of reconnection. And I, like you, am so fascinated to find out a little bit more. So please, James, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what your background is.
Thank you, Michelle. And once again, really appreciate being here today. I think for me, the journey started when I was 5. And that journey started when my dad left. My mum had 4 kids. I've got 3 amazing sisters and myself. Yes, I was spoilt being the only boy. I'll admit that. But what happened was there was a really disconnection in the family unit. Dad left, mum raised us. Yes, we saw dad every second weekend, but it was a real disconnection. And that I learned from it as a young age of what not to do in family relationships and a family unit. And that was I guess my quest and my yearning of my own self-discovery and my own journey. And as you mentioned, whilst at school still, heavily involved in sports and loved helping people and guiding people and even, in captains of all the sports that I played, it was the ability to help and serve. And at the age of 17, I started my first business in the health and fitness industry, which was a personal training environment. And then in the early 2000s, myself and business partner, we bought our first gymnasium. And that was in Sydney, in Surrey Hills. And we grew that to another one in the CBD in Sydney. And throughout that time, it was a beautiful journey. We were voted #1 fitness center in Australia. I was voted twice personal trainer in Australia, best personal trainer in Australia, won numerous business awards. And it was a beautiful journey. It wasn't a Globo gym, but it wasn't personal training studio. It was a nice in between. And what we learned in that stage was really about how do we connect with our clients? What do we do? What do we don't do? And how do we take them on that journey? And then in 2008, I sold that business to my business partner. And I was like, then I was staring at my navel. What do I do? Where's my next journey? Where's my next journey? And I love that ability to help people and really serve people. So I went and studied some more around that and the coaching space, which then led me into the coaching to run a pilot program. And I've always had coaches in sports and also in previous businesses throughout the fitness industry. And I ran a pilot program for 4 months where I got 10 people together every fortnight. I'd share a tool or a strategy. They would go away. We would support one another in that fortnight. And in that 4 months, they achieved more in those 4 months than the whole previous year. And I'm going to share a little story around that because there was one guy in particular, and he was an interior designer. And his goal was to be Australia's most recognized interior designer. And halfway through the 4 months, an opportunity came across his table to be on a reality TV show. Now, you go back to 2008, 2009, and reality TV show does some really good ones, but there's some really not so good ones. And so the group said, go on it. We'll back you. We'll support you. And he went on this interior design reality TV show and he came second. And his name is Darren Palmer. Now, if you know anything about Darren's a judge on the Block TV show. He's got all these corporate gigs and corporate sponsorships. And if you think about it, he's probably one of the most recognized interior designers in Australia today. So I caught up with him a little while ago and he said, I remember that first group and setting that goal.
So that's great about Darren, but we're talking about you, sorry, James, and I want to really keep it to you because it's about you
Totally.
And your journey. So it's fascinating that you went into that health and fitness space and then from there kind of grew and evolved through into helping people. And I can hear that passion really coming through. What do you think then with that and with that passion about serving and helping people, what do you think is really your call to what you would then define as success?
For me, it's the ability to understand what your own values are and the ability to act upon those values in all aspects of life. And that is that whole reconnection piece, reconnecting to self on what's important to you, and therefore playing it out in other areas, your business, your family, your health. And that is that whole, for me, the definition of success and reconnecting.
So for you, success is understanding those values around those different areas of your life. Have you studied values and values training like DeMartini or others? Is
yeah, I have. Yeah, and also going through an understanding, particularly around the world of NLP and the importance of understanding values and how that plays out in all aspects of life. And I think for me, that's what was the important piece of that journey, helping and serving others, which is obviously an important value to me. But it's understanding the values. But then I think it's, for me, that on that success is acting upon those values. Because we can all have that awareness and we can all go, oh, yeah, that's what's important to me. But how are you playing that out? How does that show up in your life? And that was, for me, that definition of success.
That's wonderful. And I can see in the rest of your mini bio around how you went on to, when your wife was having children, to study in that area as well and develop courses and things like that. There'd be many people watching today that know you or are hearing some of that journey from, a younger man. Health and fitness was obviously, in gyms and things. And you obviously became more and more in touch with yourself and your values and what was important to you. So with that, and there'll be other men of, different ages watching that maybe haven't quite connected to what's important to them. And for blokes, it can be harder to talk about what's important to them. So what might be some tips or suggestions that you have around how they can kind of look to finding out their values, testing? Like, I'm sure there's times where you've gone, oh, this is really important, and then realize, well, actually, it's not important in the scheme of things. So what's some tips or suggestions that you have?
Great question. And I think for me, a great tip or a great strategy is to really ask the question, what is important to me? So if you think about your business, so what's important to me about business? What's important to me about career? And what happens is that the first couple of answers can be quite generic, but the more you ask yourself, well, what else is there? What else is there? And how is this important? And for what purpose is this? And what happens is you'll keep on chunking up and you won't get it the first time. You may not get it the second time. But when you continually ask yourself and not think about it, but actually feel it, from your head, feel it from your heart, and feel it from your gut. And if you think about a figure eight, and when they're all in alignment, when they're all in flow, that's what's important to you. And that's what is by having that quiet time, not doing it on the fly, sitting in a nice quiet place. It could be either out on the beach, out in the park, whatever. In nature is always a beautiful place for me to ask those deep quality questions. And by asking yourself, well, what's important to me? What else? And for what purpose? What's the intention about this value? That's a beautiful strategy. And that will allow you to also reconnect with self, to find out what is important to you, which therefore you can then play out in the world as well.
I loved how you described it and also brought in the importance of nature. And you also quite rightly pointed out earlier about how you'd had coaches throughout your sports, and that had helped you understand to have coaches through other things. And I think when people are looking at their value systems and going on that journey, that's where a coach can actually really help as well, because other people that have already been through that process with people that aren't used to going through it can really help with some of those blockages and those I don't know that I'm sure you've come across as well. And I love how you're reminding everybody it's about just gently asking that question over and over and over again to keep drilling down into what's underneath it. And You find
one of the things that I just would like to add on that is that and I'll challenge people all the time, and I always do when they have the answer, I don't know. Because I believe, and this might be controversial to some, which is totally understandable, I believe the I don't know answer is a lazy answer. Because you have, for the listeners, you have the answer inside of you. It may be wrong, totally fine. It may be right, totally fine. But it's the ability to actually go, it could be this, or it could be that, it could be that. And so when people go, I don't know, I would say, cool. But if you did know, what could it be? What could be some options? And so what happens is we then change from the conscious to the unconscious thinking. That's why getting into nature really taps into the unconscious, because you become grounded and you can access different thought patterns that you may have not experienced before. And by when we ask that question and we just reframe the questions to ourselves and we go from I don't know to what could it be, it unlocks certain answers that you go, wow, yeah, it could be that, or it could be this. So that's why I just wanted to put that out there as well.
And so true. That's very much where the work we do around reframing comes in, because we would say, well, what would happen if you did know? What if? We would use what if to get to that same point of helping people to understand that they do know their own answers. So the last thing I wanted to say about that point before was around that the key to it, and you touched on it briefly, was around when you have that emotional connection to your answer, that's when it starts to actually go, oh, actually, I do know. The other wonderful thing that I find in this space is that when people can get stuck, we can present to them, well, what if it's this? And then when they start arguing that it's not that then helps them. And I'm sure it's the same with your interior designer example. He would have heard many times where people go, well, I don't know what color I want. He gives them a few colors and they go, well, I don't want any of those. And then that leads you to be able to identify, well, what you want out of what can seem like at the beginning, especially a lot of different options. But I love how you're encouraging people with this reconnection journey, this connecting into yourself and identifying, especially with what's happening over COVID and at this time. What do you think are some key tips that can help people with all of the different challenges going on at the moment?
I think some key strategies around that is just acknowledgement. People are doing the best that they can right now, no matter what their journey has been like. You know, they're accessing the resources that they can and that they know right now. And so by just acknowledging your neighbor, by acknowledging your workmate, acknowledging your colleagues, your family, your friends, and just saying thank you for being you right now. Thank you for being your best right now. And what that does, it instantly breaks down any barriers because people aren't expecting that. You know, and when we can actually acknowledge people, sit and listen to people, that's when we can start to really connect. Because, you know, look at the people in lockdown in Melbourne, the longest in the world. And so when people are coming back to the workplace, I was speaking to a girl this morning. She hasn't been in an office for 2 years and she's just changed jobs and she doesn't know how to actually interact with people. Do I shake their hands? Do I hug them? Do I give them a fist pump? So that's the whole reconnection. But it's the ability to reconnect with yourself first and go, where am I right now? What's important to me? How can I step into these values? And then reconnecting with others and acknowledge them, being there for them and saying thank you. That's going to start the conversation. And I think starting those conversations is going to reconnect because it is time to bridge that gap. And that time is now.
So very true. And I love how you're describing what it's like for many people at the moment to go back to a coffee shop, go back into an office. You know, even when I've been walking down the street and before everybody had a mask on even when walking because we needed to. And now people have masks off. So they're smiling at each other again, still avoiding each other. But it's kind of an interesting shift because everybody's kind of like smiling in this freedom state. But, you know, I know that as time progresses, people and things will shift again. So it's interesting for people that are going back to the workforce. I like how you touched on reconnecting to what they want to be doing and what they feel about it. You know, do you feel okay if everybody comes and touches you? Or do you want to still have kind of an exclusion zone? What if your boss all wants you to go and sit in a closed environment in a meeting room? Are you comfortable with that? So it's interesting how communication and being able to explain or explore, probably is a better word, what's going on for you is a really important part of that. What do you think, because we both work with a lot of leaders as well, what are some tips that you would give to leaders around this space?
For my recommendation for leaders around this space is the ability to reconnect with your teams through the art of listening. And just by, this is what you do amazingly, Michele, is the art of questions. And so asking good quality questions, because my belief is good quality questions equals good quality results. And so when we can ask those good quality questions to really step into beautiful dialogue, to reconnect, how are they going? What's happening in all aspects of their worlds, that bridges that gap. That really helps to reconnect with their team, with their people around them, and knowing that they're not alone. And I think that's one of the biggest things, knowing that people aren't alone. They've got a support network at work or family, whatever that unit is, that they don't have to go this alone. That, even though you've been working from home, you're still connected. Obviously, we're doing this via Zoom, your Zoom meetings, but you know what? I'm still here. I'm still connected. Is there anything that I can help you with right now? So I think really good questions from leaders. Hold the space and active listening. Be present with those conversations, and that's going to help massively.
And I think that that's never been more important, and that's a great suggestion, is around the communication and asking good questions. I'm seeing a lot again in the media around how women will be once again disadvantaged because they're less likely to go back into the office with home care and all of the different things still happening with children. And that will obviously impact on those conversations, the water cooler kind of conversations. And so I think it's also been never more important for leaders who will be held accountable if they are favouring people that are in the office and not doing more. It's kind of that funny situation where you actually have to do more for people that you're actually not physically seeing, who aren't there to remind you about them in a weird way. So it's, exactly. I guess, being more aware of all of those different dynamics, and that it could be quite easily seen that, you're just favouring the people that you're used to seeing in the office.
Yeah, and the other piece around that is being adaptable. And what I mean by that, and this is where, as we mentioned about the different programs for the dads that we run, is that adaptability is so important right now. And I've personally gone through that where, get home and you still have your work hat on, and then you try and play with the kids with the work hat on, and it just doesn't work. And so what I recommend is the adaptability process, where we're about to going to go into what's that environment that you're about to step into, who do you need to be, and then experience the past time when you were that, and then step into those characteristics. Because we have over 500 characteristics inside of ourselves. We have the lover, we have the hater, we have, the attention to detail. We have them all, good, the bad, and the ugly. But it's about drawing upon the right ones for the right environment at the right time. And that's when the connection piece really takes to a whole nother level. Being at work, being at home, being with your kids, being in all different environments. It's about who's showing up at the right time with the right characteristics. Oh, that gets me excited.
That's wonderful. I can really feel that passion. And I love the work by, I think it's Louise Armstrong in this area. She actually talks about those transition phases that especially men go through, where when they're coming home, you need to kind of leave them alone to kind of take off all of that work suit or jacket, to kind of readjust mentally before they then become the person that's at home. And the same with when they get to the office, they need to adjust and put on all the office armour and stuff. And her work around really acknowledging those transition pieces is fascinating stuff. So you mentioned a little bit more about the father's work there, and I'm fascinated because men's mental health is something that is, like women in the workplace, it's something else that thankfully is getting a lot more airtime now. For those men that may be watching, What, in terms of reconnection, if they don't want to just go down the pub and stand there drinking beer, or if they don't want to go and play sport but actually have no conversations, what are some tips or tools that you could suggest to them to help them reconnect, but in a different way? You know, like we were talking about before, just experimenting. What are some things that work in that space?
I think, yeah, really good point. I think particularly for men, it's the ability to get them moving while talking. So one of the big strategies, I'm a big believer, is the walk and talk. So it's what happens is that when you walk and talk and finding your own tribe, when you walk and talk with another mate or with a friend or a colleague, whoever that may be, is that you're actually walking side by side. So therefore, any confrontation when you're across when you're at the pub, for example, when you're across and you're seeing them eye to eye, sometimes you don't tend to open up because they're looking at you with that gaze. But when you're actually walking and talking, you're walking side by side. So there's the less of the eye contact, which is the ability to actually get out more. And so once again, when we're walking, we're keeping our conscious mind on the task at hand. So you're not tripping over and so forth. And the ability to share is so much more deeper when you're actually doing a physical activity, not to exertion like going for a run, but just a nice walk and talk. And so even as coming back to leaders, getting your work colleagues out and around the block, we go walk and talk around the block, getting your mates going for a walk and talk. We did this group, and I'm still so proud of it, for over 20 years, bunch of mates. Every Saturday morning, we would go for a walk or run, depending on who's injured and who's not. Then we'd go for a swim, and then we'll have brekkie together. And that was almost like a religious experience. And we went through, obviously, birth, deaths, marriages, divorces, babies, a whole bit. But it's the ability to actually connect with mates. And I think that is so important right now, is because guys have been left in their caves, metaphorically, and now it's the ability to come out of the cave and share what's going on for you. And that's where the walk and talk is just a beautiful piece.
That's so wonderful, because I know men's tool shed for older men that have retired are really fill that gap. But you're right, when men are much more younger and much more active. I really love that point raised about not looking in each other's eyes, because I think that that's where men may close up, but walking side by side, that's a great tip. Whether it's playing golf or walking around the block or walking around the oval, whatever it may be. It's funny, like seeing, when I go for walks around the neighbourhood, seeing women couples out walking, friends or neighbours or whatever. And it's a pity actually not to see more men out walking the dogs with other men that are walking their dogs, rather than just going on a solo walk with the dog. So these are really practical, good tips, which are very helpful, I think, for helping men to kind of come out of that cave, not just with their lockdown, but with the emotions that, like everybody, they must be carrying and need to actually have a healthy way of processing through, so that it doesn't keep bubbling up back at work or back with the family or anywhere. So we've talked about families, we've talked about different areas, but let's go back to when you started out, health. In terms of people reconnecting to their health, what are some of the key tips that you might suggest there?
One of the things that I highly recommend in relations to health is respect. And one of the, in our program, the Real Dads, when we look at Real, R is for respect, E is for emotional awareness, A is for adaptability, and L is for love. And that respect piece is self-respect. And so looking at where is all the different aspects of self-respect, and self-respect in particular, health, is so important. Mental health, physical health, emotional health. And if you were just to go, right, I'm going to be real right now. If I was to rate my self-respect around my physical health right now, what would it be? If I was just to give myself a score out of 10, okay, I'm going to be real. Yeah, it's probably a 5, for example. All right, fantastic. So what? And then I asked the question, what would it be like if you even took it to a 6 or a 7? We're not going for an 8 or 9, but even up by 1 or 2. What would that look like? And then they would go, okay, great. Now what's the gap? what are the key areas that we can work on to actually reconnect into your health? What does that need to look like? And so now they've got an action plan. And us blokes like a step-by-step list to do, right? Women are amazing because they can multitask so much more easier. But for guys in particular, it's having those steps to go, right, this is where I'm at. This is where I'd like to be. And here's a little roadmap on what I can do. And so that's the ability to reconnect with health. And when we look at respect, that's a beautiful segue into look at all aspects of self-respect when it comes to health, physical, mental, emotional. And what can I do? Even maybe one or two things around increasing your health mentally, or increasing your health emotionally, or increasing your health physically, and start there. It's not about changing everything overnight, but it's just choosing one or two things that you can do consistently and then build upon there.
And I think you're so right. As people go back to the office, one of the things in Australia, as we both know, is that the drinking culture, and for men in particular, is a very big part of that networking and net bonding. So I love that word respect, because I think keeping in mind as you go back into those normal ways of being and hanging out with each other, that it's keeping that respect for your body. You may have been going walking during lockdown and doing more physical exercise, but that time's now taken up with the after work networking and bonding that you do with your colleagues, and just keeping in mind, well, maybe I should have a drink and then a water and then a drink and then a water. And even if you get rubbished by your colleagues, just reminding yourself, well, you're respecting your body, because if you go back to all of those same habits, then you're on a terrible trajectory for as you get older.
Well, the thing is, Michelle, around that, it's a really good point. Last year in October, there was a bunch of us that did a challenge together, and one of those aspects was no alcohol. And so for 75 days, we didn't drink, and there was a bunch of other daily tasks we had to do. And from that, the clarity of mind was just phenomenal. The recovery, the less of the inflammation from training, and just the connection with family, with friends, with loved ones, with work, with clients. It was just beautiful. And so that's been carried on. So it's been no alcohol since then. And a lot of other friends and clients have done the same. And what happens and what we're noticing is, as you go back to work, those external pressures are creeping in. And so it's, how do people navigate through that? Where are you not respecting self to go, oh, I'll just have one, and that leads to two, and then that leads to what happened the rest of the night. But it's the ability to actually go, well, coming back to your values, re-looping back into your values is what's important to you. Is health important to you? So how do you have a conversation, a courageous conversation with your work colleagues that are going, come on, let's go. But it's coming back to what is important to you. And if going out and have a good time and having lots of drinks is important to you as well, fantastic. But once again, coming back to that core of really understanding that aspect, I think you'll be fine in no matter what decision you make.
Well, a great way of giving other hints and suggestions as people are going back. So if people wanted to connect in with you more and find out more about this, what's the best way to do that, James?
Love to. So over at LinkedIn, just James Short on there. And also all the other social handles, just search James Short, and also our website, which is theparentsnest.com.au.
Fabulous. And I love asking this question. If there was one thing that you would say to your younger self, the young guy, the 17-year-old starting his personal training business, what piece of advice would you give him?
That's a really good question. More courageous conversations.
Fabulous.
Yep.
Well, I hate to wrap it up, but we're just about at time, and I wanted to just give a quick call out to your fabulous charity that you support as well, the Business of Smiles. Do you want to quickly let people know about that as well, James?
Yes, fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. So the website is ihopeyouaresmiling.com. And a good buddy of mine, Scott Carson, we're on a mission to run from Sydney to Melbourne, 1,300 kilometers, to start 10,000 conversations. Because the ability, our motto is, it's time to reconnect. It's time to bridge the gap. And that time is now, and all starts with a smile. And, we have these beautiful, smiling shirts and the socks as well, that we're handing out, these 10,000 pairs of socks to start these conversations around the mental health crisis that's happening here in Australia. And so we're on a mission to raise some awareness around that and start the conversation. So come and follow us. We're on Facebook as well. Join us on the journey. There's lots of different events that we're having between now and then. And get yourself a pair of socks.
Fabulous. I'm looking forward to getting those socks, James. And thank you so much for being a guest on the show today, and for all of the incredible tips and tools that you've shared with everybody. And so much, thank you so much for today, James.
Thank you, Michelle. Much appreciated.
And to everybody watching, it's been such a fabulous show again today. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have, talking through different practical tips and ways that you too can keep building your mental wellness and also your success mindset. But for now, until next week, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.